Welcome to another edition of the KO Corner. On this segment, we want to talk about uh, the recent exploits of two top pound for pound guys. We have Mr. Gennady Golovkin, who is currently recognized as the WBA Super WBA middleweight champion of the world, and I believe he is the IBF champion of the world and ranked number one by Ring Magazine in most publications. And then we also wanted to talk about Mr. Roman Gonzalez, Mr. Referred to as Chocolatito. And this past weekend, they shared another event together as a co feature. Essentially, I think this is the second or third time they've done that on HBO. As this past weekend, Roman Gonzalez fought um, somebody. Can't think of his name. McWilliams Arroyo, who is a guy that no one's heard of. And Mr. Gennady Golovkin fought Dominic Wade in defense of his belt. And, this pretty much, for both guys, looked like a showcase fight. Um, Neither opponent posed as a major threat to either guy. And, we'll start off with Mr. Roman Gonzalez. Now, Mr. Roman Gonzalez is flyweight champion, regarded number one pound for pound in the sport of boxing by many publications. I disagree with that ranking, but I will acknowledge that he is a really good fighter. He is currently undefeated at 45-0. He has 38 knockouts. So I mean, he's a top fighter, obviously. Given the eye test, if you look at him fight, he pretty much does everything pretty well from the offensive end. He has pretty good footwork. He cuts the ring off really well. He's very fluid when he punches. He isn't predictable with his attack. He doesn't telegraph his punches. Very smooth. He puts punches together. Has a good jab, a good hook, uppercuts, lead punches, you name it. He throws in punches and bunches. He has good lateral movement. He gets out the way. I mean, he's a really solid fighter. And he proved that over the weekend, beating up McWilliams Arroyo, Puerto Rican fighter, entering the fight with 16-2. Not really heard of, not really a top contender at all, even though Max Kellerman from HBO, it was either him or Jim Lampley who said that Arroyo was a top fighter, which is not the case. But Gonzalez was able to show his skills, as the pound for pound guy in the sport. My only complaint with him is the lack of opposition. I know in the smaller weight classes it may be harder to find top upper tier guys. But looking at his resume, he's only really faced one guy that's upper echelon elite for around his weight class. And that was a fight that took place, I think almost 4 years ago, against Juan Francisco Estrada, who I believe at the time he was about 22, I want to say 21, 22 years old, a lot younger. And that was a really good fight, very competitive. It was for the WBA light flyweight title. And since then, of course, both guys have moved up to flyweight. And that was 4 years ago. That was his best opposition. Prior to the Arroyo fight, he did fight a former contender, former champ, Brian Valoria, who was a good fighter. He was kind of towards the end of his career, as was with Edgar Sosa, who we fought prior to that. So I mean, ideally, we would like to see Roman Gonzalez move up in weight and fights tougher opposition. When he announced in his post-fight interview, he plans on staying at flyweight for a little while longer. That unfortunately crushed any hopes of him fighting anyone, relevant or anyone that can stand up to him, really. So as great as he is, as good as he is, the things he's done in his career, pound for pound number one, I think that's a stretch. Top 10, top 5, yeah, but number one, I'm not too sure. But hopefully, he can continue, and as he gets greater name recognition, he can get better fights and continue to do his thing. I don't want to hate against greatness, I can't do nothing but respect him for that, for what he's done so far in his career, and hopefully he can just step it up in opposition. And speaking of that, the same can be said for Gennady Golovkin, who is currently heralded as the boogeyman of boxing and the most fearsome guy in boxing. That is the narrative that certain promotional companies want to push around. Tom Lawfer, his manager, and Abel Sanchez, his trainer, definitely likes to echo that sentiment. And HBO and ESPN definitely do a great follow-up job with that. With that said, Dominic Wade was Gennady Golovkin's opponent. How Mr. Wade got the fight, I am not sure. Especially considering Dominic Wade's last fight was against Sam Solomon, and he was awarded the split decision victory. However, he did not appear to be the winner by watching the fight. He had life and death and was struggling against Sam Solomon. And Sam Solomon, I believe he's in his 40s, and for those that don't know, he was a pretty good contender, pretty good fighter back in the day. I think he fought Winky Wright, actually, and gave him a pretty good run. He recently fought. He was recently an IBF champion for a moment, and he fought Jermaine Taylor, injured his knee, and then ended up losing that fight. And I think the Dominic Wade fight was his first fight since injuring his knee against Jermaine Taylor. And for all accounts, by most observers, he beat Wade. So that's not a good matchup. That's not a good prospect if you're going into a fight, you're having life and death with a 42-year-old man and Sam Solomon, and you're going to go fight arguably the hardest hitting fighter, in boxing. If not the hardest hitter, one of the hardest hitters in the game currently. So that's not a good look. He did not look prepared entering the ring. And it was a pretty one-sided fight for as long as it lasted, 2 rounds. And Gennady Golovkin is a good fighter. I don't want to say he's horrible or anything like that. He is a good fighter, but it's just a case with him. He has not proven himself to be upper tier, upper echelon elite. And there's a narrative with HBO's trying to push, and the guys I mentioned before trying to push, that he's ducked and everyone's afraid of him and this and that. With boxing, there's politics. There's politics with promoters, networks, things of that nature. Sometimes fights don't happen. Many times a fight that the fans want to see doesn't happen, or it takes years for it to happen. A la Mayweather-Pacquiao, for example. And there's a game that many members in the media like to play, where they place the blame on certain guys because there's an agenda, because they don't like the fighter, or there's money backing another fighter, or for whatever reason. For many years, people blame Mayweather for the fight between him and Pacquiao not happening, but in many instances, the blame could be placed towards Pacquiao and his people. It's all a matter of how you look at it. It can all be subjective, just like with ranking the top pound for pound fighters on given the eye test. It's all subjective what you look for. Same thing with scoring a fight. Some judges look for aggressiveness. Some judges look for punch output and activity. Others prefer defense and clean punches landed or whatnot. So with that said, Gennady Golovkin, he is a talented fighter. He's powerful. He's very accurate. Has a good jab. Fundamentally, he seems like he's there for the most part. There are some things with him I notice that would give him issues. He's pretty stiff, And I think a fighter that can move and a fighter that can close the range on him and get on the inside could also give him damage. A guy that can change ranges relatively easy, i.e., I don't know, Andre Ward. But for whatever reason, that fight never came into fruition. But even though they share the same network and relatively they've been within a weight class of another and fought at the same Olympic Games and both undefeated and all that. But yeah, that fight never happened for whatever reason. Golovkin has yet to really fight anyone for whatever reason. I don't buy the whole him being ducked excuse because at some point, when you're 34 years old, when you've been a professional fighter for 10 years now, when you have that Olympic background and you have people behind you and you have the network behind you, you should have secured a fight by now. The likes of Peter Quillen, Danny Jacobs, Andy Lee, somebody of that nature, if you can't secure a Canelo Alvarez or Miguel Cotto, which is what he is trying to do. I understand his reasonings for trying to get Canelo Alvarez, Miguel Cotto. Those are obviously big money draws, or even a Floyd Mayweather. It's a big money fight. I can't knock him for doing that. He should definitely try and get paid. But it's just the whole narrative of him being ducked. I don't want to hear that excuse because guys like Andy Lara has mentioned fighting him. Vanez Martirosyan has mentioned fighting him. James DeGale has mentioned fighting him. Carl Froch, Andre Ward. So there is a plethora of guys who have had the intention or have expressed the desire of wanting to fight him. Even Peter Quillen, having talked to him on a few occasions, he mentioned he was open to fighting Gennady Golovkin. It's not a matter of guys being afraid of each other. I think it's just a matter of politics. They can interfere on a certain end, and some guys want certain fights, and some guys want to take risks, and some guys don't, and that's understandable. And some guys want the easiest pathway to money. Guys want to criticize Floyd and say that's what he does, but like Gennady Golovkin, you can see many parallels with the two if you want to look at it that way. But also at the end of the day, being as this man is 34 years old and Gennady Golovkin, if you can't find any suitable challengers at your weight class at 160, you can always do what other great fighters have done in the past. Guys like Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns, Manny Pacquiao, Eric Morales, Floyd Mayweather, Juan Manuel Marquez, Miguel Cotto, the list goes on. You know what they've all done to get bigger and better fights? They've moved up in weight. So, that's always an option. If you've negotiated in the past with Carl Froch at fighting him at 168, and even recently at fighting him at a catch weight of 172, you can definitely negotiate to fight Andre Ward, because that would be a big fight. He's a bigger draw than Willie Monroe Jr. He's a bigger draw than Dominic Wade. He's a bigger draw than Marco Antonio Rubio. And, if Golovkin's team does not want to take the chance at fighting a guy who is conceived as bigger, and he is bigger. Andre Ward has fought at super middleweight for most of his career, and he moved up to light heavyweight recently. Then you can fight Andy Lara, who would be moving up from junior middleweight. And that, some people may say, oh, well, there's Al Haymon. I can't say that's a legitimate excuse for not fighting Lara because Dominic Wade fights under Al Haymon. He's managed by him. And they recently just fought on HBO. So, fights with Peter Quillen, Danny Jacobs, hopefully, Andy Lara. Those can be on the horizon for Gennady Golovkin, hopefully, if he can't secure the Canelo fight, which is what he's chasing. I'm with Team Golovkin when it comes to a middleweight champion should not defend his title at a catchweight and should defend his title at 160. And if that guy wants to come in at 155 while the challenger or the other participant comes in at 160, as long as they're within the middleweight limit, that's cool. I'm with Team Golovkin with that. I agree with them. But just in regards to facing opposition in general, Golovkin has not taken that challenge as a fighter because your managers can do so much for you. They can point you in the way to go. They can arrange fights, whatever. As a fighter, you should have some kind of pride, personal pride, and want to challenge yourself at some point. And at 34 years old, this man has not done that. I mean, no disrespect to him. I think he is a really good fighter, has a lot to offer. I just want to see him challenge himself and seek out the best opposition out there. That's all I want to see. But let me know what you guys think. Were you guys impressed by the showcase from Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito, and Gennady Golovkin, Triple G? Were you impressed by their efforts this past weekend, making quick work of McWilliams Arroyo and Dominic Wade? What do you want to see from these guys in the future? Are they pound for pound elite fighters? Let us know what you think, and get back at us.